I stood in the sterile funeral home as the lawyer's voice echoed through the silence, reading Grandma Rose's will to our small family gathering. My brother Marcus straightened his expensive suit when he heard $2 million for his business acumen. My sister Diana practically glowed as she received $2 million for being the successful one. When my name was finally called, my heart raced with anticipation. Grandma always told me I was special, different from the others. Instead of an envelope thick with legal documents, the lawyer placed a weathered, rust-stained book in my trembling hands. The cracked leather cover felt ancient against my palms. Diana's cruel laughter cut through the room like glass. "The worthless grandchild gets worthless junk," she announced loudly enough for every relative to hear. But I stayed completely silent, my fingers tracing the familiar binding because I recognized this book and knew exactly what secrets it could unlock. The aftermath of Grandma Rose's funeral felt like walking through quicksand. Every step forward seemed to drag me deeper into a nightmare I never saw coming. My name is Leann, and at 28 years old, I thought I understood my place in our family. I worked as a certified public accountant at a mid-sized firm in downtown Chicago, putting in 60-hour weeks while my siblings pursued what they called more exciting careers. Marcus, my 32-year-old brother, owned a tech startup that promised to revolutionize social media marketing. His office downtown had floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, and a staff of 12 employees who wore designer jeans and drank imported coffee. What most people didn't know was that his company hadn't turned a profit in 3 years. The venture capital funding was running dry, and his investors were getting impatient. Diana, my 30-year-old sister, had built a massive following as a lifestyle influencer. Her Instagram account boasted 2 million followers who watched her every move, from morning yoga routines in her penthouse apartment to weekend trips to exclusive resorts. She sponsored everything from skincare products to luxury handbags, creating carefully curated content that made her life look absolutely perfect. Behind the camera, however, Diana was drowning in credit card debt from maintaining her expensive image. I had always been the practical one, the sister who chose stability over glamour. While Marcus pitched investors and Diana posed for photographs, I worked with small business owners, helping them navigate tax season and plan for retirement. My co-workers respected my attention to detail, but I often felt invisible compared to my siblings' flashy lifestyles. The real shock came when I discovered that Marcus and Diana had visited Grandma Rose together 3 months before her death. They'd driven to her assisted living facility in Marcus's Tesla, carrying a folder full of carefully selected photographs and documents. The images showed me supposedly skipping family dinners, avoiding holiday celebrations, and generally being absent from important family moments. What they didn't tell Grandma was that every single absence had been work-related. I'd missed Easter dinner because I was helping a client prevent bankruptcy. I'd skipped Marcus's birthday party because I was working overtime during tax season. The family gathering Diana claimed I'd ignored had been scheduled during the same weekend I was taking my continuing education courses to maintain my CPA license. My siblings had painted me as ungrateful, selfish, and disconnected from family values. They convinced our grandmother that I only visited when I needed something, that I never called just to chat, and that I'd grown cold and calculating since starting my accounting career. Now, standing in the funeral home's main viewing room, I watched relatives whisper among themselves. Aunt Patricia shook her head sadly while looking in my direction. Uncle Robert avoided making eye contact entirely. Even distant cousins seemed to regard me with a mixture of pity and disapproval. Marcus adjusted his silk tie and cleared his throat importantly. "I think we should handle the paperwork quickly," he announced to the room. "No point in dragging this out longer than necessary." Diana held her phone at arm's length, live streaming the moment to her followers with practiced ease. Even from beyond the grave, Grandma knew who really deserved her legacy. She said into the camera, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Some people work for money, others work for family. The difference shows." The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses named Mr. Henderson, shuffled through his papers nervously. He seemed uncomfortable with the family dynamics playing out in front of him, but pressed forward with professional determination. "There is one final clause I need to mention," Mr. Henderson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All inheritance recipients must sign the transfer documents immediately following the reading, or the entire estate reverts to charity." Marcus stepped forward aggressively, his businessman persona taking over. "That seems unnecessarily complicated. Can't we handle this next week?" "I'm afraid not," Mr. Henderson replied, pulling out 3 identical legal documents. "The will specifically requires immediate signature. Mrs. Rose was very particular about this timing." Diana lowered her phone for the first time since the reading began. "How immediate?" "Right now, or you forfeit everything." My siblings exchanged glances that lasted only seconds but spoke volumes. This wasn't random. They'd known about this requirement and had planned accordingly. Marcus had his personal attorney on speed dial ready to review documents. Diana had arranged for her assistant to handle her social media posts during the funeral, specifically so she could focus on legal matters. "Leann needs to sign too, right?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting mild concern while his eyes held something much colder. Mr. Henderson nodded. "All 3 siblings must execute their documents simultaneously." Diana laughed again, this time softer but somehow more cruel. "Well, at least signing won't be difficult. How hard can it be to transfer ownership of an old cookbook?" She was still live streaming, and I could see her viewer count climbing rapidly. Her followers were eating up the drama, leaving comments full of laughing emojis and sarcastic observations about family hierarchies. But I held the book against my chest and said nothing. The leather cover felt warm under my fingers, almost alive with possibility. I knew exactly what I was holding, and I understood why Grandma Rose had chosen this moment, this method, and this particular book to deliver her final message. The cruel reality wasn't what my siblings thought they'd accomplished. The real cruelty was that they had no idea what they were about to sign away. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked the door to my modest 1-bedroom apartment on the north side of Chicago. The building was nothing special, built in the 1970s with thin walls and outdated fixtures, but it was mine. After the humiliation at the funeral home, these familiar surroundings felt like a sanctuary. I placed Grandma Rose's mysterious book carefully on my small dining room table and stared at it under the warm glow of my desk lamp. From the outside, it appeared to be nothing more than a cookbook from the 1940s. The faded title read, "Wartime Kitchen Making Do with Less," and the cover featured a drawing of a smiling housewife holding a wooden spoon. My siblings had seen exactly what they expected to see, worthless junk from a bygone era, the kind of item that might sell for $5 at a garage sale. But I knew better, because I'd spent countless hours in Grandma Rose's kitchen as a child, watching her cook and listening to her stories about the old country. I remembered one particular afternoon when I was 12 years old. Grandma had been making her famous apple strudel, and I'd asked her about the numbers written in the margins of her cookbook. She'd smiled mysteriously and told me they were special ingredients that only show up when you really need them. Now, sitting in my apartment with that same cookbook, I finally understood what she meant. I rummaged through my closet until I found the detective kit I'd bought during my forensic accounting courses in college. The blacklight flashlight was still in working condition, and when I turned it on and held it over the cookbook's pages, my breath caught in my throat. Hidden text appeared in glowing blue letters written in what looked like invisible ink that only showed under ultraviolet light. The messages were scattered throughout the recipe pages, camouflaged among ingredient lists and cooking instructions. The collection sleeps in the walls where sunlight never reaches. Read one message written in Grandma's careful handwriting next to a recipe for Victory Garden Soup. 43 pieces saved from the darkness appeared alongside directions for rationing sugar. Museum knows the truth about Father's choice, glowed beneath instructions for making bread without eggs. My heart pounded as I worked through page after page documenting each hidden message with my phone's camera. Slowly, a story began to emerge from the cryptic notes. During World War II, my great-grandfather Heinrich had worked as a shipping clerk in New York City. When Jewish families fleeing Nazi persecution arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs, some carried priceless family heirlooms, paintings, sculptures, rare books, and jewelry passed down through generations. These families, desperate for immediate cash to start new lives in America, often sold their treasures for far less than their true value. Heinrich, however, had a different idea. Instead of buying the art for himself, he convinced these families to let him hide their collections, temporarily promising to return everything once they were established and safe. The plan worked beautifully at first. Heinrich stored paintings in specially constructed hiding places throughout his large family estate in rural Illinois. He documented every piece, carefully taking photographs and recording detailed descriptions of each item along with the family information of the original owners. But as the war progressed and communication became difficult, many of the families lost touch with Heinrich. Some had moved multiple times, others had changed their names to sound more American, and tragically some had lost family members who were the only ones who knew about the hidden collections. Heinrich tried desperately to locate the original owners, but post-war chaos made it nearly impossible. He spent his entire life maintaining the hidden collections, hoping that someday the rightful families would return to claim their heritage. When Heinrich died in 1968, he passed the responsibility to Grandma Rose. With strict instructions, the art must be preserved until the families could be found, and if that proved impossible, everything should go to a Holocaust memorial museum to ensure the pieces were never lost again. The cookbook contained detailed maps showing exactly where each piece was hidden within the family estate. The house had been built with secret compartments behind false walls, hidden panels beneath staircases, and concealed spaces within the foundation itself. My hands shook as I realized the full implications of what I was discovering. The old family estate was the same house that Diana had inherited as part of her $2 million windfall. She now legally owned not just the building, but according to the inheritance documents we'd all signed, all contents therein, including any discovered property or artifacts. But Diana had no idea what she actually owned. According to the messages hidden in the cookbook, the collection included works by Claude Monet, Pablo Picasso, Vincent van Gogh, and dozens of other renowned artists. Conservative estimates place the total value at well over $50 million. I found legal documents tucked between the cookbook's back pages, carefully preserved in protective plastic sleeves. Grandma Rose had spent decades researching the rightful owners of each piece, documenting family trees, tracking down descendants, and preparing for the day when justice could finally be served. Her plan had been to donate the entire collection to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., where trained researchers could continue the work of reuniting families with their lost heritage. But the inheritance structure changed everything. By signing the documents at the funeral home, Marcus and Diana had legally transferred all property rights to themselves. They now had the legal authority to do whatever they wanted with anything found on the estate, including selling it for personal profit. More importantly, they'd also signed away their right to challenge any decisions about the property's contents. The legal language was carefully crafted to prevent future disputes about discovered assets. I realized that Grandma Rose had orchestrated this entire scenario with incredible precision. She'd known her other grandchildren well enough to predict they would focus entirely on the immediate monetary value of their inheritance. They would sign, quickly take their money, and never bother to explore the deeper secrets the estate contained. But she'd also known me well enough to trust that I would understand the cookbook's true purpose and have the determination to see justice done. My phone rang, startling me from my discoveries. The caller ID showed the name of the law firm that had handled Grandma's estate. Miss Leann. Mr. Henderson's voice sounded nervous. I hope I'm not calling too late. I wanted to confirm that all 3 inheritance documents were properly executed today. Yes, I replied carefully. All 3 of us signed. Excellent. That means the property transfers are now legally binding. Your sister Diana has full ownership of the estate and all its contents. Your brother Marcus has received his monetary inheritance, and you have legal possession of the cookbook. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the incredible irony of the situation. My siblings believed they had humiliated me by ensuring I received the least valuable inheritance. They had no idea that they'd actually handed me the key to something far more precious than money. The cookbook wasn't just a collection of recipes. It was a roadmap to justice, a treasure map, leading to one of the most significant art recoveries in modern history, and a chance to honor the memory of families who had lost everything to unimaginable evil. But I also realized that time was working against me. Diana would soon take possession of the estate and might decide to renovate, potentially destroying the hidden compartments and their priceless contents. I had to act quickly, but I also had to be smart about it. I couldn't simply call Diana and explain what I'd discovered. She would immediately claim ownership of everything and likely sell the pieces to the highest bidder, regardless of their historical significance or moral implications. I needed a plan that would protect the art honor Grandma Rose's wishes and ensure that justice was finally served for the families who had lost their treasures 8 decades ago. As I carefully closed the cookbook and placed it in my bedroom safe, I made a silent promise to my grandmother's memory. This wouldn't end with cruel laughter and public humiliation. This would end with the truth and with the restoration of what had been stolen long before any of us were born. 3 days after the funeral, I found myself sitting in the University of Chicago's Art History Library, surrounded by stacks of books about stolen art recovery and World War II cultural preservation efforts. My laptop screen displayed dozens of open browser tabs, FBI art crime team resources, Holocaust asset recovery databases, and international art restitution organizations. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Grandma Rose's hidden collection represented something far beyond monetary value. These weren't just paintings gathering dust in secret compartments. They were family heirlooms, cultural artifacts, and irreplaceable links to lives destroyed by genocide. My research led me to contact Sarah Mitchell at the FBI's Art Crime Team headquarters in Washington, D.C. I explained that I had information about potentially stolen artwork from World War II, and she immediately transferred me to their Holocaust-era assets recovery division. Agent Robert Chen listened patiently as I described the cookbook's hidden messages and the timeline of my great-grandfather's wartime activities. He asked detailed questions about Heinrich's documentation methods and requested digital copies of the maps I'd discovered. This sounds consistent with several cases we're currently investigating, Agent Chen told me during our second phone conversation. The pattern of well-intentioned Americans helping refugee families then losing contact after the war happened more often than most people realize. He also warned me about something that made my blood run cold: professional art thieves who specialized in tracking down exactly these types of hidden collections. Once word gets out about a discovery like this, you attract attention from some very dangerous people, he explained. There's a whole network of criminals who monitor estate sales, obituaries, and family disputes, looking for opportunities to steal recovered art before it can be properly processed. His warning proved more prophetic than I could have imagined. That Friday afternoon, I decided to drive past Diana's newly inherited estate to get a better sense of the property's layout. The house sat on 12 acres of farmland, about 40 minutes outside Chicago, surrounded by tall oak trees and rolling hills that provided natural privacy from neighboring properties. Diana's red Mercedes convertible was nowhere to be seen, and I remembered her posting on social media about a weekend getaway to some exclusive spa resort in Wisconsin. She'd been documenting her post-funeral self-care retreat with hourly updates showing yoga classes, mineral baths, and organic meals. As I sat in my car at the end of the long gravel driveway, I noticed movement near the house's back entrance. A tall man in dark clothing was walking around the property with what appeared to be professional surveying equipment, taking measurements and photographs of the exterior walls. My first instinct was to assume Diana had hired contractors to begin renovation work, but something about the man's behavior struck me as odd. He moved with the stealth of someone who didn't want to be observed, constantly glancing around as if checking for witnesses. I parked my car behind a cluster of trees and used my phone's camera to zoom in on the stranger's activities. He appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested a lifetime of difficult experiences. His clothes were expensive but practical dark jeans, leather boots, and a jacket that looked like it could conceal multiple tools or weapons. When the man pulled out what looked like ground-penetrating radar equipment and began scanning the house's foundation, I realized this was no ordinary contractor. This was someone who knew exactly what he was looking for, and it wasn't plumbing or electrical systems. I watched him work methodically around the building's perimeter, focusing particular attention on areas that corresponded roughly to the hiding places marked in Grandma Rose's cookbook. He spent nearly 20 minutes examining the basement windows and photographing the stonework around what I knew was Heinrich's main storage area. My heart raced as I realized someone else knew about the hidden collection. The man finished his survey and walked back to a black SUV with rental car plates that I hadn't noticed before. As he drove away, I managed to capture a partial license plate number and a clear photograph of his face. That evening, I called Agent Chen again and sent him the images I'd taken. His response was immediate and alarming. "That's Viktor Kozlov," he told me grimly. "He's not exactly a criminal, but he's not exactly legal either. His grandmother was part of a Jewish family from Vienna who lost their entire art collection when they fled Austria in 1938. Victor Agent Chen explained had spent the last 20 years tracking down his family's stolen artwork through a combination of legitimate research and questionable methods. He'd recovered several pieces by purchasing them from unsuspecting collectors, but he'd also been investigated for breaking into private homes where he suspected family heirlooms were being kept. He's never been convicted of anything serious," Agent Chen continued, "but he operates in a legal gray area. If he believes your great-grandfather's collection contains his family's property, he might try to recover it regardless of current ownership laws." The thought of Victor breaking into Diana's house while she was away sent chills down my spine. Not because I was concerned about Diana's safety, but because I realized that if Victor took the art, it might disappear forever into private collections or black market sales. I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I drove back to the estate that same night, determined to confront Victor before he could destroy 8 decades of careful preservation. I found him exactly where I expected, crouched beside the basement's exterior entrance, using specialized tools to examine the foundation stones. A small penlight illuminated his work area, and I could see several pieces of electronic equipment spread around him on a dark cloth. "Excuse me," I called softly, stepping out from behind the trees where I'd been watching. Victor spun around instantly, his hand moving toward what I assumed was a weapon concealed beneath his jacket. When he saw that I was a young woman alone, his posture relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained wary and calculating. "Private property," he said with a slight accent that could have been Eastern European. "You should leave." "So should you," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Unless Diana hired you, which I seriously doubt." Victor studied my face in the dim light, clearly trying to determine whether I represented a threat or an opportunity. After a long moment, he spoke again. "You are family member, yes, the granddaughter who inherited nothing." The fact that he knew about the will reading sent another wave of alarm through my system. Victor had been researching our family far more thoroughly than I'd realized. "How long have you been watching us?" I asked. "Long enough," he replied. "Long enough to know that your great-grandfather was good man in bad time. Long enough to know that art belongs with families, not hidden in walls." Victor's voice carried a weight of sadness that made me reconsider my initial fear. This wasn't a professional criminal motivated by greed. This was a man trying to recover his family's heritage, just like I was trying to honor mine. "What exactly are you looking for?" I asked. Victor reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph showing a young woman standing next to a beautiful landscape painting. The woman had Victor's eyes and the same serious expression. My grandmother, Anna Kozlov. This picture was taken in Vienna, 1937. Behind her is painting by Claude Monet, Morning on the Seine. My family owned it for 3 generations before Nazis came. My breath caught as I recognized the painting's description from Grandma Rose's hidden notes. According to her documentation, Morning on the Seine was indeed hidden somewhere within the estate's walls. "The painting is here," I whispered. "I believe yes. My research shows your great-grandfather helped many families from my neighborhood. Some families he returned artwork after war. Other families—" Victor's voice trailed off meaningfully. "Other families never came back to claim their property," I finished. Victor nodded grimly. "Some families all killed in camps. Some families moved to different countries and lost contact. Some families like mine spent 70 years searching." I realized I was standing at a crossroads that would determine not just the fate of the hidden collection, but the moral legacy of Heinrich's wartime actions. I could call the police and have Victor arrested for trespassing, protecting Diana's legal ownership, while potentially condemning priceless cultural artifacts to unknown fates. Or I could choose a different path, one that honored the original intent behind Heinrich's preservation efforts. "I have something you need to see," I told Victor, pulling out my phone and showing him one of the photographs I'd taken of Grandma Rose's hidden messages. Victor's eyes widened as he read the ultraviolet text describing the location and condition of various hidden artworks. When he saw his grandmother's name listed among the original owners of preserved pieces, tears began streaming down his weathered cheeks. "She is here," he whispered, touching the screen where Anna Kozlov's name appeared. "After 70 years, I found her." But our emotional moment was interrupted by the sound of a car engine turning into the estate's driveway. Headlights swept across the property, and I heard Diana's voice talking loudly on her phone about cutting the spa weekend short because of work emergencies. Victor and I looked at each other with shared understanding. We were both trespassing on Diana's property. We were both seeking the same hidden collection, and we were both about to be discovered by someone who had absolutely no idea what we were really after. "Quick," I whispered, gathering Victor's equipment. "There's a storage shed behind the house. We can hide there and figure this out." As we ran through the darkness toward safety, I realized that my quiet life as a small-town accountant had just become infinitely more complicated. But I also realized that for the first time since Grandma Rose's death, I felt like I was doing exactly what she would have wanted me to do. The truth about Heinrich's collection was finally going to come to light, and justice delayed would not become justice denied. The storage shed behind Diana's house smelled like old motor oil and dust, but it provided perfect cover as we watched her unpack her car in the driveway. Victor and I crouched behind stacks of gardening equipment, barely daring to breathe as Diana's voice carried across the evening air. "No, Marcus, I don't care what your lawyer thinks," she was saying into her phone while pulling designer luggage from her trunk. "The estate is mine now, and I'll renovate however I want. If you're so concerned about property values, maybe you should have inherited real estate instead of just cash." Victor leaned closer to me and whispered, "She plans renovation." I nodded grimly. Diana's already posted about turning this place into her dream content creation studio. She wants to knock down walls, install professional lighting, and build a photography space. The implications hit both of us simultaneously. Any construction work would inevitably uncover Heinrich's hidden compartments, exposing the art collection to workers, contractors, and potentially the general public. Once that happened, there would be no way to control what became of the pieces or ensure they reached their rightful owners. "We have maybe 1 week," Victor said quietly, 2 weeks maximum before construction begins. I pulled out my phone and showed him the detailed maps from Grandma Rose's cookbook. Under the shed's dim light, we studied the building's layout and identified the most accessible hiding places. The main collection is stored behind false walls in the basement, I explained, pointing to Heinrich's careful annotations. Smaller pieces are hidden beneath the staircase and inside what looks like a built-in bookshelf on the second floor. Victor traced the routes between hiding spots with his finger. We document everything first, take photographs, record serial numbers, create inventory. Then we contact proper authorities. What if Diana discovers us before we finish? Victor's expression hardened. Then we move faster. Over the next hour, as Diana settled into the house for the night, Victor and I developed a systematic plan for accessing and documenting Heinrich's collection. Victor's years of art recovery experience proved invaluable. He knew exactly what information would be needed to establish ownership claims and legal restitution cases. Each piece needs multiple photographs, he explained. Front view, back view signature or marking areas, any damage or restoration evidence. We also need measurements, written descriptions, and comparison with historical records. I realized that Victor had come prepared for exactly this scenario. His equipment bag contained professional-grade cameras, measuring tools, cataloging software, and detailed files about his family's lost artwork. "How many pieces do you think your family lost?" I asked. 17 confirmed, Victor replied sadly. Paintings, sculptures, jewelry, rare books. My grandmother kept detailed insurance records, photographs, receipts. She never stopped believing we would find them someday. As the house lights went out one by one, Victor and I prepared for what felt like the most important mission of our lives. We weren't just art thieves breaking into someone's property. We were family members trying to complete a circle of justice that had been broken for 8 decades. The basement entrance was exactly where Heinrich's maps indicated, hidden beneath a decorative stone step that lifted away to reveal a narrow wooden door. Victor's lockpicking skills made quick work of the old-fashioned mechanism, and within minutes we were standing in a space that hadn't been disturbed since Grandma Rose's final visit years earlier. The basement was larger than I'd expected, with stone walls that stayed cool even during summer heat. Multiple wooden crates lined the walls, each one carefully labeled with coded numbers that corresponded to Heinrich's documentation system. Victor opened the first crate with trembling hands, revealing a small oil painting wrapped in protective cloth. Even in the flashlight beam, the colors seemed to glow with inner life. The signature in the corner read, C. Monet, 1897. Morning on the Seine. Victor breathed, his voice thick with emotion, exactly as grandmother described it. Watching Victor hold his family's recovered treasure was one of the most moving experiences of my life. This wasn't about money or inheritance disputes or sibling rivalries. This was about a grandson finally touching something his grandmother had treasured, something that connected him to a world that had been destroyed before he was born. We worked methodically through crate after crate, documenting pieces by Picasso, Van Gogh, Degas, and dozens of lesser-known but equally significant artists. Each painting told a story of loss, preservation, and hope. Heinrich's notes revealed the names of original families, dates of preservation, and detailed descriptions of the circumstances surrounding each rescue. "Your great-grandfather was a remarkable man," Victor said as we photographed a small sculpture that had belonged to a family named Rosenberg. "He saved more than art. He saved memory." But our careful work was interrupted by sounds from upstairs. Diana was moving around the house, and her footsteps seemed to be heading toward the basement door. Victor and I froze, cameras in hand, surrounded by priceless artwork and incriminating evidence of our break-in. If Diana discovered us, everything would be ruined. She would call the police, claim we were burglars, and take legal possession of the collection before we could establish proper ownership claims. The footsteps stopped directly above our heads, and I heard Diana's voice again, this time speaking to someone new. "I'm telling you, Marcus, there's something weird about this house," she was saying. "I keep hearing noises, and some of the stones around the foundation look like they've been moved recently." My blood ran cold as I realized Marcus had come to the estate. Both of my siblings were now in the house, and from their conversation it seemed they were beginning to suspect that something unusual was happening with the property. "Maybe we should have the place professionally inspected before you start renovating," Marcus suggested. His voice carried the tone of someone who was thinking like a businessman rather than a brother. "Good idea," Diana agreed. "I'll call a contractor tomorrow. Full structural assessment foundation inspection the works. I want to know exactly what I'm working with." Victor and I looked at each other with shared panic. A professional inspection would uncover the hidden compartments within hours, exposing the entire collection to people who had no understanding of its historical significance. But then Marcus said something that changed everything. "Actually, Diana, I've been doing some research on Grandma's finances. Did you know she was living on a fixed income for the last 10 years, but somehow managed to maintain this big property and still leave us millions in inheritance? What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting there might be assets we don't know about. Hidden accounts, buried valuables, maybe even a safe somewhere in the house. Think about it. Why would she leave Leann that weird cookbook unless it meant something?" Victor gripped my arm tightly as we listened to Marcus piece together the truth with frightening accuracy. My brother might have been struggling financially, but his business instincts were sharp enough to recognize when numbers didn't add up. "So what do you want to do?" Diana asked. "I want to search this place from top to bottom before you renovate. If there's money or valuables hidden here, we split it 50-50. Leann got her cookbook. She doesn't need to know about anything else we find." The greed in Marcus's voice was unmistakable, but it also revealed something else. He was planning to return to the estate, probably within the next few days, to conduct his own treasure hunt. Victor and I had run out of time. We couldn't complete our documentation project gradually over several weeks. We had to finish everything immediately before Marcus and Diana's searches uncovered Heinrich's carefully preserved collection. But we also couldn't risk getting caught in the basement with stolen property regardless of our moral justifications for being there. "We leave now," Victor whispered urgently. "Come back tomorrow night with more equipment, finish everything in one trip." As we carefully replaced the artwork and secured the basement entrance, I realized that the race against time had become much more complicated than we'd anticipated. We weren't just competing against construction schedules and renovation plans. We were competing against my own siblings who were smart enough to recognize opportunity and ruthless enough to seize it. The next 24 hours would determine whether 8 decades of careful preservation would result in justice for the original families, or whether Heinrich's noble efforts would be reduced to a greedy treasure hunt by people who had no connection to the artwork's tragic history. Walking back to my car through the dark countryside, I made a silent promise to Victor, to Grandma Rose, and to all the families whose treasures were still waiting in those hidden compartments. Tomorrow night, we would finish what Heinrich had started, and we would make sure that his legacy honored the memory of everyone who had lost everything to hatred and violence. The art would be recovered, the families would be reunited with their heritage, and justice would finally be served, even if it took all night to make it happen. The next evening arrived with an unseasonable thunderstorm that provided perfect cover for our return to the estate. Victor and I had spent the entire day researching legal protocols for art recovery, contacting additional family members of original owners, and organizing equipment for a comprehensive documentation project. Agent Chen from the FBI had agreed to coordinate with local authorities once we completed our inventory, but he'd also warned us again about the legal complexities of removing artwork from private property, even with righteous intentions. "Document everything, but don't remove anything," he'd instructed. "Let us handle the legal seizure once you've established probable cause." Victor brought additional cameras, professional lighting equipment, and a portable computer for immediately uploading our findings to secure servers. I brought copies of all Heinrich's documentation, family contact information I'd researched, and a detailed plan for accessing each hidden compartment efficiently. We arrived at the estate around 11 p.m., expecting to find the house dark and empty. Instead, we saw lights on in several rooms and 2 cars in the driveway, Diana's red Mercedes and an unfamiliar black sedan with dealer plates. "Construction inspector," Victor suggested hopefully. But as we crept closer to the house, we could hear voices through the basement windows, and the conversation made our worst fears reality. "The authentication looks legitimate," a man with a thick accent was saying. "These pieces are definitely genuine, probably worth more than your inheritance combined." Diana's voice responded with barely contained excitement. "How much more?" "Conservative estimate $15 to $20 million for the Monet alone. The Picasso sketches could bring another $10 million. The Van Gogh..." The man's voice carried the tone of someone delivering incredible news. Victor and I looked at each other in horror. Diana had already found the hidden collection, and from the sounds of the conversation, she was negotiating with a private art dealer for immediate sale. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" Diana asked. "I can have buyers lined up within 72 hours, the dealer replied. "Cash transactions, no questions asked, completely confidential. You walk away with more money than most people see in a lifetime." I felt physically sick as I realized what was happening. Diana had discovered Heinrich's carefully preserved collection and was planning to sell everything to black market buyers who would never allow proper authentication or family restitution claims. "There's just one problem," Diana continued. "My brother Marcus has been asking questions about hidden assets. If he finds out about this collection, he'll demand his share." "Then we work quickly," the dealer suggested. "I can arrange transport tonight. The pieces disappear into private collections, Marcus never knows what he missed, and you have complete financial freedom." Victor's face had gone white with anguish. "They are destroying everything," he whispered. 70 years of searching and they sell to criminals in one night." But as we listened more carefully, we realized that Diana's conversation with the art dealer was revealing far more than immediate sales plans. It was revealing a level of knowledge and preparation that seemed impossible given the timeline. "I've been planning this for months," Diana was saying. "Ever since I convinced Grandma that Leann was stealing from her, I knew the estate would be mine. The art dealer contacts the authentication research, the buyer network. I set all of that up before the will was even read." The dealer laughed appreciatively. "Very thorough. Most people discover collections like this by accident and make foolish mistakes trying to sell quickly. Not me. I've known about Heinrich's hidden artwork since I was a teenager. Grandma let it slip during one of her stories about the war years. I've been researching the collection's value for over a decade, waiting for the right opportunity." Victor gripped my arm so tightly it hurt. "She knew," he breathed. "She knew all along and let families search for nothing." But Diana's confession was just beginning. "The best part is how perfectly everything worked out," she continued. "Marcus thinks he's so smart with his business analysis, but he has no idea what real wealth looks like. And Leann, with her pathetic little accounting job, she got exactly what she deserved for being Grandma's favorite." "What about the cookbook the lawyer mentioned?" the dealer asked. Diana laughed coldly. "Just Grandma's last little joke. Probably some sentimental nonsense about family recipes. Leann was always the one who sat in the kitchen listening to the old woman's stories. Let her keep her worthless book while I keep the fortune." The casual cruelty in Diana's voice was breathtaking. She had orchestrated our grandmother's final humiliation. Of me manipulated the inheritance distribution and planned to steal artwork worth tens of millions of dollars, all while destroying any chance for legitimate family restitution. But then we heard footsteps on the stairs leading to the basement, and Marcus's voice joined the conversation. "Diana, what the hell is going on down here?" There was a long moment of silence before Diana replied, her voice suddenly nervous. "Marcus, I didn't hear you come in. I was just having the house inspected like we discussed." "Inspected by someone who's loading priceless paintings into transport cases." Marcus's voice was ice cold. "How stupid do you think I am, Diana?" The dealer's accent became more pronounced as stress entered his voice. Perhaps I should return later when family business is resolved. Nobody's going anywhere, Marcus said firmly. Diana, you and I need to have a serious conversation about partnership agreements and full disclosure. Victor and I realized that we were witnessing the confrontation we'd hoped to avoid. Marcus had discovered Diana's secret operation, but instead of stopping her illegal activities, he was positioning himself to demand a share of the profits. Fine, Diana said after a long pause. 50-50 split, just like we discussed, for any hidden assets. But this stays between us. Leann doesn't find out, the authorities don't get involved, and we handle everything discreetly. Agreed, Marcus replied. But I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. How many pieces, what's the total value, and how did you know where to find everything? As Diana began explaining Heinrich's preservation system to Marcus Victor, and I faced an impossible decision. We could call the police immediately and hope that local authorities would be able to stop the illegal sale. But that would also mean admitting that we'd been trespassing on Diana's property. Alternatively, we could try to gather evidence of the illegal art trafficking operation and present it to the FBI, but that would require us to continue our dangerous surveillance while Diana and Marcus worked with professional criminals. We need proof, Victor whispered. Recording of conversation photographs of illegal sale evidence that cannot be denied. I pulled out my phone and began recording the basement conversation through the window. Diana was describing the locations of various hidden compartments, while the art dealer took notes about transportation logistics. But as I held my phone up to capture better audio, my hand slipped against the wet window frame. The device fell 3 feet onto a pile of decorative stones, making a loud clattering noise that echoed through the quiet night. The conversation in the basement stopped immediately. "What was that?" Marcus asked sharply. We heard footsteps moving rapidly across the basement floor, heading toward the windows. Victor and I had perhaps 10 seconds before we would be discovered trespassing on the property, with recording equipment in the middle of documenting an illegal art sale. "Run," Victor whispered, but I shook my head. "No more running," I replied, standing up so that I was clearly visible through the basement window. "It's time for the truth." As Marcus, Diana, and the art dealer stared up at me through the glass, I held my phone high enough for them to see that I'd been recording their conversation. "Hello, Diana," I called down to her. "I think it's time we discussed what Grandma Rose really left me in that worthless old cookbook." The look of absolute terror on my sister's face told me everything I needed to know about how this confrontation was going to end. The truth was finally coming out, and there was no going back for any of us. The basement window that separated me from my siblings felt like a barrier between 2 different worlds. On one side stood Diana Marcus and a black market art dealer, discussing the illegal sale of Holocaust-era artwork. On the other side stood Victor and me, carrying the weight of 8 decades of family secrets and moral responsibility. "Leann, what are you doing here?" Diana's voice cracked with barely controlled panic as she stared up at me through the glass. "I'm finishing something that Grandma Rose started," I replied, holding my phone where everyone could see the recording indicator, "and documenting something that you should never have begun." Marcus stepped forward, his businessman instincts kicking in as he assessed this new threat to their operation. "How long have you been out there?" "Long enough," I said simply. "Long enough to record Diana's confession about manipulating Grandma's dementia. Long enough to document your plans to sell stolen artwork to private collectors. Long enough to gather evidence that will interest the FBI's art crime team." The art dealer, whose name I'd learned was Dmitry Volkov during their recorded conversation, moved toward the basement stairs with obvious intent to leave immediately. "Mr. Volkov," I called after him. I should mention that Agent Robert Chen from the FBI's Holocaust-era Assets Recovery Division is expecting my call in exactly 30 minutes. He's already reviewed preliminary documentation about this collection, and he's standing by to coordinate with local law enforcement. Dmitry froze on the staircase, realizing that running would only confirm his criminal intentions. Diana found her voice again, but it came out high and desperate. "You're bluffing, Leann. You don't know anything about this collection, and you certainly don't have FBI contacts. I pulled out the cookbook and held it where she could see it clearly. Grandma Rose left me more than just recipes, Diana. She left me Heinrich's complete documentation system, including maps showing every hiding place, photographs of every piece, and contact information for the original families. Victor stepped into view beside me, and I saw recognition dawn on Diana's face as she remembered seeing news coverage about art recovery specialists. "This is Victor Kozlov," I continued. "His grandmother was Anna Kozlov, and she owned the Monet painting you were just planning to sell for $15 million. Victor has been searching for his family's artwork for 20 years, and he has legal documentation proving ownership." The color drained from Marcus's face as he began to understand the legal implications of what they'd been planning. "Diana, you told me this was legally clear. You said the inheritance gave us rights to everything on the property." "It does," Diana insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. I smiled and pulled out my phone again. This time, instead of recording, I played back audio from my previous conversations with Agent Chen. "Miss Leann." Agent Chen's voice filled the basement through my phone's speaker. "I want to be very clear about this. Regardless of current property ownership, artwork stolen during the Holocaust remains the rightful property of the original families or their descendants. No statute of limitations applies to Nazi-looted art, and current possession doesn't establish legal ownership." Victor added his own evidence to our presentation. "I have copies of insurance records, family photographs, and authentication documents going back to 1895. This collection includes 17 pieces stolen from my family alone." But Diana wasn't finished fighting. Her years as a social media influencer had taught her how to think quickly under pressure, and I could see her calculating new approaches to the situation. "Fine," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Let's say you're right about the legal ownership issues. That doesn't change the fact that you're both trespassing on my property right now. I can call the police and have you arrested before your FBI agent friend has time to get involved." Marcus nodded, seeing an opportunity to regain control. "Diana's right. Whatever moral claims you think you have, you're still breaking the law by being here." I looked at Victor, and he gave me a small nod of encouragement. "Actually," I said, pulling out a thick folder of documents, "I'm not trespassing at all. I'm here as an authorized representative of the Heinrich Müller Art Recovery Foundation, operating under federal guidelines for Holocaust asset recovery." The confusion on my siblings' faces was worth all the careful preparation Victor and I had done during the day. "What foundation?" Marcus demanded. "The one Grandma Rose established 18 months ago." I explained when she realized that Diana had been researching the collection's monetary value rather than its historical significance. I held up legal documents that Victor and I had discovered in Grandma Rose's safe deposit box that morning after Agent Chen had helped us obtain a court order. Grandma Rose spent the last year of her life working with federal authorities to establish proper legal framework for returning Heinrich's collection to the rightful families. The foundation was created specifically to handle situations where family members might try to claim the artwork for personal profit. Victor stepped forward with his own documentation. "The foundation has legal authority to recover artwork on behalf of original families with cooperation from federal law enforcement. We are not trespassing. We are conducting authorized recovery operations." Diana's carefully constructed plan was crumbling around her, but she made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Even if all of that is true," she said, "you still can't prove that I knew about the collection before today. For all anyone knows, I discovered it accidentally and was simply trying to have it properly appraised." I smiled and held up my phone one more time. This time I played back Diana's own recorded voice from our surveillance session. "I've been planning this for months," Diana's voice echoed through the basement. "Ever since I convinced Grandma that Leann was stealing from her, I knew the estate would be mine. I've known about Heinrich's hidden artwork since I was a teenager. I've been researching the collection's value for over a decade." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of police sirens in the distance, growing steadily louder. Those would be the local authorities Agent Chen contacted an hour ago, I explained. They're coordinating with federal agents to secure the collection and arrest anyone involved in planning its illegal sale. Dmitry Volkov finally spoke up, his accent thick with panic. I was simply providing appraisal services. I had no knowledge of any illegal activity. Victor laughed bitterly. Mr. Volkov, your business card lists you as a discreet acquisition specialist for discerning collectors. The FBI has been tracking your transactions for 3 years. As law enforcement vehicles filled the driveway outside, Diana made one last attempt to control the narrative that had defined her entire adult life. "This is ridiculous," she announced, pulling out her phone to live stream the scene. "I'm being harassed by jealous family members who can't accept that I inherited more than they did." But Marcus, watching his own criminal exposure grow with each passing minute, finally made the choice that would determine his future. "Diana, stop," he said quietly. "Just stop. This isn't about inheritance anymore. This is about doing what's right." He turned to Victor with genuine remorse in his voice. "Sir, I apologize for what we were planning to do with your family's property. I got caught up in the money and forgot that these pieces represent people's lives." Victor nodded acknowledgement, but his attention was focused on the basement stairs, where federal agents were now appearing with art recovery specialists in tow. As Agent Chen descended into Heinrich's hidden storage area, I felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had been broken 8 decades ago was finally being closed, not through vengeance or greed, but through justice and remembrance. The tables had indeed turned, but more importantly, the truth had finally set everyone free. 6 months later, I stood in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., watching Victor's eyes fill with tears as he stared at his grandmother's portrait hanging beside Mourning on the Seine. The painting had been beautifully restored and now occupied a place of honor in the museum's new wing, dedicated to recovered family treasures. The Heinrich Müller Art Recovery Foundation had successfully returned 23 pieces to their rightful families, with an additional 20 artworks going to Holocaust memorial museums, when no surviving family members could be located. The total recovery represented one of the largest single restitution cases in modern history. Diana had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for art trafficking and conspiracy charges. Her social media empire collapsed overnight when news of her crimes became public and her followers abandoned her accounts in droves. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the woman who had built her career on projecting perfect lifestyle imagery had destroyed everything through greed and manipulation. Marcus, however, had received a suspended sentence in exchange for his full cooperation with federal authorities. His testimony had been crucial in exposing the network of black market dealers that Dmitry Volkov had connected Diana with. More importantly, Marcus had used his business skills to help establish the foundation's operational framework. "I spent so many years being jealous of you," Marcus admitted to me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "You were always Grandma's favorite, always the one she trusted with important things. I thought it was because you were smarter or better than Diana and me." "What do you think now?" I asked. Marcus stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "Now I think she trusted you because you were the only one who understood that some things are more valuable than money. She was right about that, and she was right about you." Our relationship had slowly begun healing over the months following Diana's arrest. Marcus had moved back to Chicago and started working with small nonprofit organizations, using his business expertise to help them maximize their impact rather than their profits. It wasn't the flashy career he'd once pursued, but it was meaningful work that gave him genuine satisfaction. Victor and I had become close friends through our shared commitment to the Foundation's mission. His expertise in art recovery complemented my financial management skills, and we'd successfully reunited dozens of families with treasures they'd never expected to see again. Every time we make contact with another family, Victor told me as we walked through the museum's halls, I think about my grandmother and how proud she would be to know that her story helped recover so much more than just our own pieces. The Foundation's work had expanded beyond Heinrich's original collection. We now assisted other families with similar recovery cases, and we developed educational programs to help people identify and properly report potential Holocaust-era artifacts. Agent Chen had become a regular collaborator, and his team at the FBI had praised our systematic approach to documentation and legal compliance. "You've set a new standard for how these recoveries should be handled," he told us during the museum's dedication ceremony. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when I received a letter from an elderly woman named Rachel Stein, whose family's painting had been among those Diana planned to sell to black market collectors. "Dear Miss Leann," the letter read, "I am 93 years old, and I never expected to see my mother's portrait again. When your foundation contacted me about the recovery, I cried for 3 days, not from sadness, but from joy. My mother died at Auschwitz in 1943, but now her memory will live on in your museum where children can learn about what happened to families like mine. Thank you for caring about more than just money. Thank you for understanding that some things are worth preserving even when they have no price tag." Standing in the museum that day, surrounded by artwork that had been hidden for 8 decades and family members who had searched for most of their lives, I finally understood what Grandma Rose had been trying to teach me through her cryptic inheritance. The rusty old cookbook hadn't been a consolation prize or a cruel joke. It had been a test of character, a measure of whether I could see beyond immediate value to lasting meaning. My siblings had seen $2 million and called it wealth. I had seen a chance to restore justice and found something far more precious than money, the knowledge that I had honored my family's legacy and helped heal wounds that had been bleeding for generations. Victor placed his hand on my shoulder as we stood before his grandmother's recovered Monet. "Your great-grandfather was remarkable man," he said, repeating the words he'd spoken months earlier in Diana's basement. "But you, Leann, you are a remarkable woman. You finished what he started." The museum was filled with visitors that afternoon, many of them children on school field trips, learning about history and the importance of preserving cultural heritage. Watching their faces as they looked at the recovered artwork, I realized that Heinrich's wartime rescue operation had ultimately succeeded in ways he never could have imagined. The art had been preserved not just as valuable objects, but as living testimony to the resilience of families who had lost everything, yet never stopped hoping for justice. As Victor and I walked toward the museum's exit, we passed a display case containing Grandma Rose's cookbook, now part of the permanent collection documenting the recovery process. The hidden messages were illuminated under UV lighting, showing visitors how ordinary objects could contain extraordinary secrets. A small placard beside the cookbook read, "Sometimes the most precious inheritances come disguised as worthless gifts. The challenge is having the wisdom to see beyond appearances and the courage to honor the truth they contain." I thought about Diana sitting in her federal prison cell, probably still believing that she had been the smart one who almost got away with the crime of the century. I thought about Marcus slowly rebuilding his life on a foundation of meaningful work rather than empty ambition. And I thought about the letter from Rachel Stein, now framed on my office wall, reminding me every day that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Walking out of the museum into the Washington sunshine, I felt at peace in a way I'd never experienced before. The inheritance battle that had begun with cruel laughter and public humiliation had ended with restored dignity and healing that would last for generations. Grandma Rose had been right about me after all. I was the granddaughter who could be trusted with the family's most important treasure, not because I was perfect, but because I understood that some responsibilities are too sacred to be measured in dollars. The rusty old cookbook had indeed opened doors, but not to hidden wealth or secret fortunes. It had opened the door to justice remembrance and the kind of legacy that enriches the world rather than just bank accounts. And that, I realized, was the most valuable inheritance anyone could ever receive. As I drove home to Chicago that evening, I thought about all the families who were still searching for lost treasures, still hoping for closure, still believing that justice might someday prevail. The Heinrich Müller Art Recovery Foundation would continue their work, one recovered painting at a time, until every family story found its proper ending. Have you ever discovered that something seemingly worthless was actually priceless in ways you never imagined? Share your thoughts in the comments below about what true inheritance means to you. If this story moved you, please like this video. Subscribe to hear more inspiring tales of justice and family redemption, and share it with anyone who believes that doing the right thing is always worth more than doing the profitable thing. Thank you for listening to this journey of discovery, and may you always have the wisdom to recognize when life hands you treasure disguised as junk. Until next time, remember that the most meaningful legacies are built not on what we accumulate, but on what we preserve for those who come after us.